My name is Vitale, and I'm a member of the Detroit Greens and the Green Party of Michigan, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this forum, Green Party Forum, on what are green jobs and why don't we have them. Just a note on where the title came from. At our last state membership meeting of the Green Party, we made a decision to try to have forums on green jobs and around green jobs in different parts of the state. And what are green jobs and why don't we have them came from the fact that it seems that in some parts of the state, green jobs are actually being used as a union busting technique. And so that the people in that area, when they hear the word green jobs, they hear of union jobs being eliminated and, quote, green jobs coming in and taking those positions. So when we first started talking about this, we wanted to make it have that discussion. What are green jobs? Green jobs are not union busting jobs, in our opinion. And then why don't we have them? So again, just to let you know a little bit about the origin of the topic. And the format to me is we have three really excellent speakers to talk about the issue. But the reason for the format like this is to really have a dialogue among us all about the seriousness of the jobs issue. And I think just to say why, it's dropped completely off the page. Everything is about the deficit. The New York Times has stopped reporting that the two-digit number. They used to have the current unemployment rate the way that the government describes it, and then that other number, which includes everyone who stopped looking, wants part-time, and that was the largest, always a much bigger number, because it's the full number. They've stopped reporting that number because they're not interested in having things look bad for the administration. So to me, the importance of the question of green jobs in a state that has lost hundreds of thousands of jobs in the last 10 years, and at the same time, the importance of it politically, because no one is talking about that fact, and that fact is one of the things that is driving the desperation and the crisis in the state of Michigan. So, with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, commentator, Derek Grigsby. He's a chairperson of the Green Party of Michigan and well-known Detroit troublemaker.
Proud of it. Thanks. Yeah, well actually I had wrote a very great speech, when Fred told me about this event. And then he told me how the format was going to be set up. We're going to be in most of the discussions. So I scrapped that very good Martin Luther King type speech so we can talk, so we can have a discussion about this. I'm not going to really speak on green jobs because I haven't really researched it. And once I found out that these two guys, Michelle and Frank, were going to talk about green jobs, I just want to let them go at it. I want to hear all you guys have to say, because you guys work around this stuff. Frank is a retired UAW worker who's definitely been in the forefront of auto workers, and they're speaking out on how, instead of the auto workers or the auto companies firing and laying off the workers and destroying Detroit, that how we can use those factories, I'm sure you're going to talk about that, and all those other resources to create work. I'm looking forward to hearing that. Just to say that the Green Party, we definitely, far from being union busting, green jobs, the only union busting entity or thing we have to worry about are our elected officials who do bidding of these corporations. That's the only union busting problem or issues or matters that we need to be concerned with. Green jobs create work. It's not an oxymoron, but green jobs. Come on. how is that, you know, a union busting term or idea, you know? Green jobs, jobs, we need jobs. So what is the unemployment rate here in Detroit? It's probably 50%, and that's officially. That's horrible when you can think of 50% unemployment, official unemployment in Detroit, which is a majority black city. And just around the state, the unemployment rate, I would think, with black individuals or African Americans, I like to call them black, from the Black Power days. It's horrible to even think of. It's probably 70 or 80%, you know. So yeah, the Green Party is definitely in the forefront of pushing the issue of green jobs, and I wish we had more people here to really hear about what we have to say, and we're going to have more forums. Looking forward to it. So, like I said, I don't really have a speech. I just want to hear what you guys got to say, unless there's something specific that I can address.
That sounds good. Thank you. Good, Barry. I appreciate it. Next up, Frank Hammer, and Derek introduced him, and you can say some more things about yourself if you'd like. But go ahead.
I just got to tell you, knowing that Derek was going to prepare a Martin Luther King type speech, I didn't do any preparation whatsoever. Okay, yes, I'm Frank Hammer. I'm a retired auto worker, part of something called the Auto Workers Caravan, which is sort of a loose circle of auto workers who are giving expression and voice to progressive rank and file concerns. And we sort of developed a proposal that we call a proposal for movement building. And I think the first simple answer to why we don't have green jobs is because we don't have a very powerful movement for them. And I'm convinced that that's what it's going to take, is a strong grassroots movement to address this issue. We first sort of emerged with the idea of converging to convert in the summer of '08, which is the period of time when GM and Chrysler and Ford at that point looked like they were all heading into bankruptcy. This was right after the Wall Street casino crash, where we saw the automobile market in the United States go from 16, 17 million down to 10. So we saw a lot of capacity being closed, and we saw a lot of workers being thrown out in the streets or being given buyouts and all kinds of schemes to reduce the workforce. And so the way we got our name was that we actually had a gathering here in Detroit and got workers from Ohio and Indiana and Illinois and Pennsylvania, and assembled in 5 cars to go to Washington, D.C., where we had a press conference with a great deal of media. Our timing was really good. And we talked about an alternative plan for what had been the auto industry and actually going to plans for a transportation industry. So that's a little bit of the background. And the other piece of it is that leading up to the U.S. Social Forum last year, actually Fred Vitale and I, we had sort of a discussion at some point. We were over at the Metro AFL CIO office. Reggie was there too. Mm-hmm. And we had, at that point said, well, you know, we ought to have something on May Day around green jobs. And I said, bingo, that's a great idea. Needless to say, it didn't transpire because people had so much on their hands to do with the social forum that it was impossible to conceive of just one more thing. And this year, with all the assaults in Wisconsin, Indiana, and here, well, it's just like overwhelming to even just try to deal with that. So this is a proposal for May Day of 2012, and we thought, let's start now, and maybe we'll actually have something going by then. So this is first and foremost about unemployment. And I just saw this thing on the internet yesterday from something called the Michigan Policy Network, which comes out of Michigan State. And it talks about employment rates goes down, but jobs don't go up. It's about Michigan. And it said, I'm just going to give you some highlights. Flint's unemployment rate dropped from 16% in 2009 to 11.8% this past December. And these are official stats, right? This drastic change in numbers doesn't necessarily mean job growth, however. And then with Michigan losing population faster than most states, the unemployment rate goes down faster as well. So in other words, it appears like the rate's going down, but why? Because people are leaving the state.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Goodness gracious.
And what it goes on to say is a quote here from somebody from the Global Income Economist. I fear some of these long-term unemployed people that are still in the state will not get back into employment and will leave the labor force over time, in part because they're less desirable hires. So the longer you're unemployed, the less likely it is that you're actually going to end up getting a job. So it says new jobs are being created throughout the state, such as 750 new employees for General Motors in Flint, with 11,000 total in Michigan. Yet these are barely shedding light with the 15,000 recent cuts in public sector jobs. So this crisis of no jobs and unemployment is with us, and it's going to be with us as far as they're concerned. It's going to be with us for a long time. So this is the starting point, and that we need to address this question of unemployment. So that's one component of this proposal. The other part of this has to do with the idea that with the sort of the state of crisis that we find ourselves in Michigan, in Detroit, we don't have the luxury to sort of cherry pick what problems we want to work on, and well, let's work on unemployment, or let's work on mortgage foreclosures, or let's work on, because it's overwhelming. And the idea is, can we capture as many of these issues in one movement? Reading. Fred, you didn't have enough chairs, man.
There you see it. It always happens. It always happens. There are some folding chairs over there. Okay, okay.
And then the question is, well, what crises are we addressing? And usually when the subject of global warming comes up is when people say, oh no, I can't deal with that as well. It's too much to deal with. And my answer is, you know, that's not the kind of thing that we can negotiate when we want to address the question of global warming, because it's happening as we're speaking, and it's happening at crisis proportions, and it's not something that we can put off to another day. And the fact of unemployment and global warming actually both represent crises, but also an opportunity. And that's how we're looking at it. But this is really an opportunity for us. I don't know that I have to convince anybody here that global warming is real and is becoming a more serious issue daily. Probably most of you know that the last decade was the hottest ever recorded for the whole globe. That we can give many, many examples about the glaciers, for example, in Bolivia are melting, which is their water supply. There was a heat wave in Europe several years ago, which resulted in the death of 70,000 people because it was extreme heat. We had the fires in Russia, and I forget the statistics that resulted from all the fires there. We, of course, have had more severe hurricanes, like as we saw with Katrina. Currently, as we're talking about the floodwaters on the Mississippi River, next door in Texas has been a drought, and apparently land the size of Rhode Island has been up in flames in Texas. and I don't even think we hear anything about it. But climatologists definitely think that there's a link between global warming and the droughts that we're seeing, and an example of what's going on in Texas. And what's really interesting about Texas is that every one of the congressional representatives from Texas was against the EPA controlling carbon emissions, right? Well, it's an oil state, right? But in the meantime, their state's burning up because of the drought. It's like, wow. James Hansen, who used to be NASA's chief climatologist, has already talked about global warming reaching a third tipping point and a reversible tipping point. We're currently at 387 carbon particles per million, as opposed to what's perceived as a maximum sustainable, which is 350. And coming home, we have to realize that the U.S. produces 25% of all the carbon emissions in the world.
Really?
25%. We also consume 25% of the oil. So I guess there's a relationship, right? And even if we stop our carbon emissions dead on right now, globally, the globe is still going to warm up for the next 50 years. That's what we're dealing with. So in some ways, we're also having to figure out how to adapt to a warmer Earth and all the consequences of that. 20% of those emissions come from the automobile industry. They come from cars. So our view is, what role do we play in this struggle against global warming? And that is to convert what's the auto industry into products that are usable in terms of either energy or transportation that would lessen our role in producing carbon emissions as a global responsibility, and at the same time as a job creator in this region, which has been an industrial region, and we know how to make things. So that was sort of like our pitch when Diane was part of the Auto Workers Caravan that went to DC. That was our pitch there, and we've been sort of banging these drums since. So what we're saying is that a lot of the idle capacity that exists in the region, in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, the idle workers, put the plants back to use, put the workers back to work, producing a new economy for the region, making this a different kind of transportation center for the 21st century as opposed to the transportation center that we were in the 20th century. It's interesting to note that since we started this, there's now emerging a more serious discussion about really developing a Woodward light rail system.
Mm-hmm.
Now this week we've been hearing about high-speed rail between Detroit and Chicago. And so there is some movement in this direction. And it seems to us that to be the manufacturers of the rail cars in this region would only make a lot of sense and would be, in some ways, a fitting bit of justice for us. Now, and I also noticed, by the way, if climate change doesn't convince you, I noticed that we're having a film showing about Crude Awakening, which is talking about peak oil. So not only do we have pressures on the auto industry from the point of view of emissions, but we also have pressure on the auto industry from the point of view that we're reaching maximum easy access to oil, and from here on out, it's going to be much more expensive to go to the Canadian tar fields and extract oil. It's going to be much more environmentally dangerous, and we're going to be faced with the crisis of how do people going to get around if they're not going to be, cars are no longer going to be affordable, if gas is not going to be longer affordable. So we are talking about not just a gradual conversion, we're talking about a rapid conversion. And we gave as an example the transformation of the industry in the Detroit region at the beginning of World War II, where we talked about that in a period of 8 months, this is prior to Pearl Harbor in 1940, where U.S. industry had planned to build new factories to build munitions for the war theater in Europe. And in fact, what happened was that those plans were shelved, and there was an actual conversion of auto plants for the production of military hardware. And we know that within 8 months it was accomplished, and we know that it's possible to do it if the political will and the political understanding is there. So we give that as an example, that yes, it can be done if we understand the threat. And so we have to be clear about what is the threat that we're faced with now. So when we're exploring this idea of arsenal of democracy, I was playing around with the idea, well, maybe we'll call this arsenal of democracy 2.0 or something like that, right? So went out to the internet and said, well, I wonder if anybody's used that already. And lo and behold, sure enough, somebody's already using it, arsenal of democracy 2.0. And it's not about peace. It's about military and homeland security. And there was a major article by business groups, and I want to give you a couple of quotes from that are talking about establishing this region as an arsenal of democracy 2.0. Give you a couple of quotes. Armed with institutional knowledge of supplying tanks, armaments, weapons, and specialty components, as well as offering one of the world's most sought-after skilled workforces, the region has maintained and enhanced its standing as a technical and mechanized stalwart in protecting and defending America and its allies around the world. Now, I've not seen auto workers quite referred to in such glowing terms, except in this arsenal of democracy idea, right? But there's a problem. As more and more Michigan firms find work in the auto industry drying up, they are increasingly looking to defense and, to a lesser extent, homeland security to stay in business. We're swamped with companies seeking military contracts. In the Macomb-St. Clair region alone, about $300 million in military contracts were awarded in fiscal 2008. And they're referred to this defense corridor, which is a rectangle of small and large military contractors in Macomb County stretching north from the Detroit Arsenal on east 11 Mile to 19 Mile, and from Mound to Van Dyke. That's where the core of this industry is. So the point being that we're not operating in a vacuum. We're operating in a context of there are other plans for our region, and the plans of the region is to keep us addicted to war, because if there's no war, there's no reason to have these jobs. So to have these jobs, my God, we have to have some more war. And I think that's extremely dangerous for us and for our future development. So the idea, I started out by saying that this is about movement building, that this idea of conversion can involve a lot of different stakeholders and can be brought together in one focused movement. Certainly labor. I've already talked to Michigan Peace Action and the Detroit Network of Peace and Justice, and I don't know if you saw maybe in August of last year, Michigan Peace Action had they walked in the demonstration with balloons that said "Retool for Peace." They're on board. They think this is fabulous to try to do this, and also see the threat of this arsenal of democracy 2.0 as something that we need to counter. Clearly, this would be in the interest of environmental groups. I think the issue of social justice movements in regards to transportation, mobility as a human right, that in Detroit, a quarter to a third of people don't have cars. Bus service is on the decline. This is a social justice issue that we need to embrace. Transit advocates, transit union interests, youth, student, and faith-based movements, small businessmen, and business people, and entrepreneurs. All these forces can be gathered together under this umbrella, and we think that it can build a very broad and deep movement in this direction. So the proposal now is to gear some work between now and May 1st of 2012 toward having a demonstration on that day next year at the train station, which is a symbol of the decay of what used to be a transit system, a transportation system, And to do it in conjunction with the immigrant rights march that I hope will be happening on May 1st of next year, which is only a mile away at Clark Park, and to link these two issues together, because if there's anything that climate change is doing, it's creating immigration and migration in incredible proportions. So there's a natural connection to bring these two things together. So that's a proposal. And I really like the idea that we're going to have a discussion, because that's really what this is intended for.
That's right.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, John. Okay. Well, that sounds good. And our last speaker will be Michelle Martinez. She's active with the Sierra Club, and Michelle and I are working together actually in People and Energy Coalition, where I volunteer at Michigan Welfare Rights, and along with many environmental organizations, it's a new coalition to focus attention on DTE and combine the issues of dirty coal with a dirty social policy, basically. You know, throwing people out of work and high rates, exorbitant rates for businesses. They're guaranteed 11% profit by Michigan law. So we're working together on that.
What's the profit?
11. Everybody in Michigan, all the companies are all making 11%. So there's no reason why DTE shouldn't too. That's sarcastic. Okay. So Michelle Martinez.
Thanks. Thanks for having me here today, and thanks for providing a really good context, because I feel like both of you spoke really passionately about what we're actually dealing with in Detroit, and how important that is for us to realize both the racial and the economic implications of joblessness here in the city of Detroit specifically, and for Michigan in a larger context. I mean, we know that we still live in one of the most segregated cities in the United States, and we know that we're losing population, and although it sort of puts a fog and some smoke and mirrors around the unemployment numbers, Detroit is more impacted by the joblessness rates. So it's a very serious situation, and I don't think that it's any stretch of the imagination, certainly from the environmentalist perspective, that we are in a crisis situation, that we believe if climate change happens, a 3-degree in the global temperature could result in 30% complete exhaustion, complete extinction of 30% of our species. So this is a situation that we see as extremely critical.
What degree?
3 degrees increase in the global temperature would result in 30% extinction, and those are IPCC, International Panel for Climate Change numbers, not my numbers. And I'm not a climatologist, so I don't have real specific numbers, but in doing some of this work with the Sierra Club, I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I've learned along the way, and look to you all for conversation on your experience living in the city and working in the city, because really that also has so much value. So, you know, since I've been involved in the energy piece of green jobs, which is burning coal and trying to move away from burning coal into a green energy economy. So DTE, 80% of its portfolio is burning coal for our energy, and that's about 20% higher than the national average. Now, we don't believe there's any such thing as clean coal, no matter what. You know, the mining process is terrible, it's dirty, mountaintop removal destroys economic livelihoods, it destroys ecological livelihoods, it destroys all sorts of cultural and immaterial value that our country holds. And then when we bring it up and we burn it to create energy, we are dealing with a climate change crisis. So we all sort of are coming into this agreement that burning fossil fuels is a terrible, terrible part of our history, and we need to think about how we can vision into moving into a new form of energy, right? And burning oil is one of the things, as Frank said, that leads us into war, right? It was a big part of our economy here in Detroit, but we've lost that. And everybody from Belgium to Japan wants to come now and take pictures of the ruins of Detroit, what happens when capitalism fails. ruin porn is what they call it now. And how do we cope with that in Detroit? We don't want to be known for that. We want to become known for coming out of the ashes and rising out of the ashes. And I think that is a very vivid image of the phoenix rising. And so if we move together on creating that vision, I think that's the most important thing. But we need to come to, I think, a common analysis of what the situation is. So, race and income are huge frameworks for how we work through the Sierra Club in Detroit. So just so you know, Michigan pays about $1.9 billion for asthma treatment, and 44% of all white students live in the top 10% of the most polluted locations in the state, while about 88% of African American students live in the most polluted areas in the state. So we have this understanding that people of color definitely bear the disproportionate impact of pollution. So climate change is something terrible that we deal with when we think about the melting of the ice caps in Bolivia. But today, when you have an asthma attack, when you can't play baseball on your baseball team because you have asthma, that's stealing your youth. That's real, and that costs the family money. Every time you go to the hospital, you have to deal with that. Every time you have an inhaler in class, every time you're stigmatized because of these things, that actually has immaterial value as well. So we know that this is a very high cost already, right? These are real costs that are happening right now today, and that's a product of burning fossil fuels. That is caused by pollution, exacerbated by pollution. To a greater and greater extent, we understand that not only does it cause asthma, pollution like PM 2.5, it causes cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, strokes, right? We had a researcher last week from University of Michigan say that, on 9/11, when the truck sat idling on the bridge, there were so many more hospital admissions because of high blood pressure on that day than any other day, because the pollution from the trucks idling sent people into the hospital in Southwest Detroit. So we know that those things are linked, and that's statistically proven. So the health impacts are one thing that we really need to pay attention to, and how it affects our city. But when we say green jobs, I think that we don't have a clear agreement on what green jobs are. And so what is this thing called green jobs, right? In my opinion, and I think in the Sierra Club's opinion, it's those jobs that will be around as a result of a sustainable economy when fossil fuels are phased out, right? So every time we create an energy efficient furnace, right? Every time we retrofit our homes, every time we get in a fuel efficient car or manufacture those cars or manufacture a wind turbine or a solar panel, those are green jobs, right? And I think that when we're talking about, why don't we have them, right? I think there's a little bit of a balance in there when we have to say, okay, so why don't we have them? In the state of Michigan, green jobs is the only job sector that grew in the latter part of the last decade, right? So while everything else was stopping, we actually gained over 100,000 green jobs in the state of Michigan. So everything else was on the decline and green jobs were on an incline. And that's according to the Michigan Green Jobs Report, right? So like it or not, Jennifer Granholm did help to commission some of these things, and so we did get that report stating that, agriculture in Michigan is very strong. Transportation, renewable energy production, and energy efficiency are some of the green jobs that we can look at to say, okay, so out of all the businesses in Michigan, what are the areas that are growing the most? And renewable energy production grew net 7%, right? So not huge, but considering that everything else was on the decline, that actually was creating new jobs. And coming out to say that they still have about $14 billion just ready for that investment, right? Ready to make that investment. But we still need the policy signals to send that investment into motion. And that could create anywhere, they're saying, between another 100 to 200,000 jobs over the next decade. So we can see the movement of what green jobs can do for us, right? But not every green job is the same. And I think that's something that we need to start talking about in our discussions as we're building the movement. What does it mean not just to have a green job, but to have a good green job? You know, things that have quality wages, that have work protections, that guarantee collective bargaining rights, to make sure that we have all of the great things that made us the great city that we are, and transferring those skills and those benefits into a new industry that would hold us. But we also have to consider, outside of just the box of jobs, is what are the benefits of a green economy, right? We need to start internalizing those hospital bills. We need to start thinking about what kind of effect over the 20-year span is that going to have on our energy bill, right? How many people are we going to send to war as a product of oil, and how many people are we going to send to war as a product of wind, okay? You can't outsource a green job to retrofit a home, okay? That has to stay in Michigan. When you construct a home, it has to stay here. You can't take the house out, ship it to China, and then bring it back. Or at least I haven't heard of that yet. I don't know if it's happened yet, but those are the sorts of things that we're talking about, right? But we still need huge policy indicators, right? So one of the things people talk a lot about is the idea of feed-in tariff, which is a policy tool that Germany has implemented that has helped them increase their renewable energy portfolio to about 15%. And what a feed-in tariff does is, if Derek decides to put a solar panel on his house, let's say it costs him $8,000 a solar panel. Now that's a pretty big cost, right? But he decides to put 5 of them on there because he knows he only consumes 100 kilowatts a month, which is pretty low because he's a huge energy saver. But he has 800 kilowatts extra, right? So in Germany, by law, the utility must buy that energy back from Derek. So he's actually getting paid by the utility to produce energy on his roof. That's a distributed energy system. Right now in Michigan, that doesn't exist.
Yes, it does. It's called net metering. And we have it in Lapeer County with our wind turbines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's with DTE.
Sure.
And the lawyer, Linda Berker, installed a new type of tri-vane wind turbine. They're vertical vanes that go around, and she can explain all to you about how you get net metering through DTE in Lapeer County. Now, when they did it,
Candace, can you just let her finish?
So that's
I
great.
just wanted to correct a
No,
Well,
misconception.
that's absolutely correct.
But
So,
I don't want to, I want to make sure that she can finish, and we
Right.
don't start a dialogue now, but thank you,
Right.
Candace.
Right, and that's a good dialogue piece, because that's probably a part of the legislation that was passed in 2008, PA 295, right, which is the energy package, which forced utilities to have 10% renewable energy by 2015, right? And so there are a lot of projects that are happening right now until 2015, which is the finish line, right? And so there are the Solar Currents program, Consumer Energy has a program. There's lots of great things. Macomb Community College, GM, there's lots of solar panels going up right now. We're really happy that all of those things are happening, the wind turbines that are happening, but there's still that 10% limit, and we don't know if utilities are going to go beyond that, but that's a very good point. So what we want to do is get beyond 10%. That 10% is a cap, and it's not healthy for our economy, and it's not healthy for our jobs, because if all of those jobs stop in 2015, then we end up in the same position that maybe we did in the 70s, where we had a lot of hope for renewable energy, and then we went static for 20, 30 years, right? So we want to continue to ask for and to advocate for clean energy solutions in a sustainable way, and that would include a feed-in tariff type legislation or however that would happen. The other thing that we are obviously advocating for, many people advocate for in the distributed energy economy, would be something like a co-op. So there are different people working on those types of things where you're not just, Derek's not just putting solar panels and selling it back to the utility, but he's creating a community co-op where he's selling it to a specific municipality or to his neighborhood or something like that. So there are a lot of different ways that an energy future can manifest, right? And we know that there's a lot of skepticism, right, around how many jobs can the clean energy economy create. Well, I'll tell you this. I don't have an exact number that is guaranteed on the jobs for clean energy economy in 2020, but I would be a lot happier having homegrown wind and solar here in Michigan and not going and fighting wars over over oil and coal, right? Keeping that amount in Michigan. One statistic that we have is that in 2000, Michigan as a state exported $12 billion to spend on their energy. In 2010, it was $24 billion that we're exporting out of the state for energy. Okay, so if you think about the total
How is that getting
amount,
exported? I'm sorry.
so whenever we buy coal, it's coming from Wyoming or West Virginia. Whenever we buy gas and oil, it's coming from all over the world. So every time we're expending any kind of energy in our home or in our car, it's going out of state. If we invested that in wind and solar and had all of our electric vehicles running on Lake Michigan wind power, that would create a closer knit economic system, right?
That's a beautiful vision.
It's a beautiful vision. And it's a vision that I think we all can share. And diversifying the energy portfolio is the most important thing for the next decade. So I would drive that home. And I would also drive home that the coalitions are the most important thing to make that happen. So we're engaging in all kinds of coalitions now. We're with the Blue-Green Alliance, in which the UAW is a part, advocating for clean energy solutions. We're in the People and Energy group with social justice, making sure that clean energy solutions are not just happening for a certain demographic, but are available for the entire population, and making sure that cleaning up dirty coal plants and making sure that new EPA regulations are passed, and how that would create new jobs as well for Michigan economy, and pushing the coal plants to become cleaner and cleaner until we can get to that clean energy economy that we want. So there's lots and lots of things that we can do, and it's going to save our society. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create social benefits for everybody. In ways that we don't necessarily think about because they're externalized onto us, on our hospital bills, on our heating bills, on our gasoline bills. And we're putting that back into one